I'm the director of the Montana Head Start Association. This work is sponsored by the Bright Futures Birth to Five program. We're so excited that part of that work of building our system was supporting family engagement training. And we're really excited to have our group of Montana experts come on. Today, we're focusing on Circle of Parents. And our first webinar leader, thank you so much, is Melissa Winger. Melissa works for 0 to 5 Montana. She is their early childhood policy manager. She is also a licensed marriage and family counselor. Melissa is passionate about early childhood, mental health, and bringing people together with an extensive background in parenting classes, building coalitions, and generally supporting our early childhood system. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. We're so happy to have you today, and thank you all for coming.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to take a second to share screen. If you can see it, hopefully, let me know. See some thumbs up, maybe if you can see a presentation there. You never know in this land of Zoom what other folks are seeing. All right. Well, as she said, my name is Melissa Winger, and I'll be sharing about the Circle of Parents model. When Karen and I first connected a few months ago about this family engagement series that she was doing, we were kind of brainstorming some Montana-based trainers, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I'm trained in a model that actually fits really well with parent engagement because it's led by parents." So I'm excited to share with you today. Uh, Let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. So, I am by training a marriage and family therapist, and I'm just going to share a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to be inviting some participation throughout this webinar. So, if you are someone who is going to hop off early, and you don't feel like you can say yes to the ask I'm going to give, just let me know, and I'm totally fine with that. But I will be assigning some roles today as part of our discussion to help you kind of experience the model a little bit. So I have three little kiddos. I was about to say 6, 4, and 2, but my oldest just turned 7 about a week ago, and my daughter is about to turn 5 next week. So we're in birthday season, and they'll all shift up, but I've got three littles, and my journey in motherhood has been an adventure, starting with postpartum. I had some pretty significant postpartum mental health struggles when I had my oldest son. When I was a child, my mom's best friend was a childcare provider, and she had a childcare that was right next to my elementary school. And I used to walk by it on my way home from school. And there was one day that I was walking by, and there was ambulances and there was police cars and there was all kinds of first responders there at this childcare. And I wandered in because it was my mom's best friend, and I was used to wandering in and just saying hi. And I unfortunately saw a baby being taken out on a gurney that had passed away from SIDS. And that was something that really sat with me as I was preparing to have my first child. I had had a few miscarriages before this baby, and as my little boy was about to be born, I was very anxious about SIDS and about the struggles that can come with safe sleep and just taking care of a little person that you can do all you can do, but sometimes there's things that are out of your control. He was also an emergency C-section. He had developed a hematoma in his cord the last second, and I didn't get to labor for very long before his heart rate had dropped pretty significantly, and there was a lot of meconium when my water broke, and we just ended up in an emergency C-section pretty quick. He had to be resuscitated when he was born. My oldest there in the middle is Tucker. And it was just like a scary way to enter parenthood. And that mental health journey for me was not something that I shared with a lot of people because I was a therapist. And I felt like I should just be able to handle it. And I was a practicing therapist. And so I really felt like I should be able to handle it. So as I was, a young parent and starting out, I had a lot of mental health struggles that I really just kept to myself. That I did share with my husband a bit, but I just told myself, you know the skills, you know how to help someone else in this situation. You should be able to handle that. And so I'm going to start this out with that, a little bit of vulnerability with my story, because I'll be inviting vulnerability for others. In the Circle of Parents model, that's really kind of the way that it operates, is it um, it operates off of the tenet that vulnerability really invites vulnerability. So I'm going to start with that as part of this presentation to give you a bit of a flavor of the model as we get into this. So another thing I'm going to do as we get started is to assign a few roles to some of you. So could you raise your hand if you're willing to have a role? I promise it's not going to be like open sharing. It's going to be like, can someone give me a 5-minute warning? Um, also, could someone be willing to uh, let me know if there's anything in the chat? So things like that. So if you could raise your hand for a second, I'd love to just give you a second to raise your hand if you're willing. Okay, Betty. Betty,
And
can you be my timekeeper? When I have 5 minutes left in my presentation, will you please just come off mute and let me know? Okay, so I've got Carrie. Carrie, can you please let me know if there's anything in the chat? And you can just come off mute and say, hey, Melissa, we've got something in the chat, and just let me know. And I need one more hand up. I haven't, let me see. Do we have another hand? I need to like shuffle through to see.
and again, folks, you can use the react is where the
Yes,
raise
you can
hand
do
is.
that too. I promise these are not going to be scary things.
I see Gray has raised their
Okay,
hand.
Gray. I can always count on Gray. Gray, can you please take 2 screenshots throughout this and send them my way? And I know that sounds silly, but in a Circle of Parents group, we usually have like a photographer who takes pictures of things so that we can have like fun examples to do for marketing and things like that. So in lieu of that, we'll be doing like a screenshot today, if that makes sense. So thank you all for participating with those roles. In the Circle of Parents model, that's something that's done that we encourage parent leaders to do, is to assign roles to other folks who are involved, and we'll come back to that at the end. All right, so we'll move along here in my presentation. So the history of Circle of Parents in Montana is really based. I like this quote so much. It's one of my favorites. It says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And that's by Margaret Mead. So I've got some photos here on the left-hand side of the screen. The top one is Carla Sue Chapman. Carla Sue Chapman lived in Butte, and she is a parent of 3 kiddos who have special healthcare needs. A couple of them are on the spectrum and have some other medically complex needs going on. And she was sitting in a school board meeting, and in the school board meeting in Butte, they were discussing some things, some policies and changes that would impact kiddos with special healthcare needs and IEPs. And she had the overwhelming feeling that the people who were making decisions and trying to help the situation for those kiddos did not understand what it was like to have a child with special healthcare needs. That the people who were trying to solve the problem were unacquainted with what the problem was. And she felt this so strongly that she stood up and she said, "You do not understand. This is something that you are not actually solving with these measures. And this will make it more challenging for us as parents who are raising these kiddos who need IEPs and who have children with special healthcare needs. And as she stood up and she said that, she said, we need people who are helping parents and families who know that experience, who understand it because they've lived it. And in that meeting, at the bottom here, we have this gorgeous woman who is a brunette over here. This is Heather, and Heather was in that same meeting, and she found her right afterwards, and she said, "Let's make it happen. Let's build support in our community for parents who have children with special healthcare needs who know that experience." So Heather did some digging and found the Circle of Parents model, which is a national model. And she and the woman in that picture with her, Barb, they introduced it to Montana. They got trained in it. They started to open up some groups, the first of which being in Butte, and they really developed and started the Circle of Parents model in Montana. So the question is, what is Circle of Parents? So Circle of Parents is a national network of parent peer support groups that was really born out of the effort to prevent child abuse and neglect. And these groups are pretty flexible in what the model looks like. If you attend a group, even in Montana, from one location to another, you're going to have a very different experience. The model is quite flexible, but it's based on a few tenets and a few principles that will be hopefully present in any group that you would attend. But these are mutual self-help groups. They're groups led by parents for parents or led by caregivers for caregivers. And each group meets a different kind of demographic. And typically, the parents who attend or the caregivers who attend would be in a group facilitated by parents or caregivers in that similar demographic. In Montana, the way that we kind of structure this is that the funding has historically come for families and children with special health care needs. So in Montana, all of the parent groups are based in that kind of demographic bucket, but it still can look quite different because we have also written into that funding that there are so parents who have demographic or risk factors that could put a child at risk for having a special health care need also can be served by a Circle of Parents group. So we do have a few postpartum mental health support groups, one of which I started here in Dillon, Montana, where I live. And another one is in Mineral County, and we've got one in Madison County as well for parents of some who have postpartum mental health stuff going on. We also have groups for parents who are in recovery. We have groups for parents who have had some kind of interaction with CPS or the foster system, and we have groups for parents with special health care needs. So
Melissa,
there's a
can I
little bit
jump
of a
in just for a second?
diversity. What was that?
Can I interrupt just for one sec?
Yes,
Are
please.
you going to talk a little bit more in detail about the funding at some point in time, like how much it costs and where you get the money from?
Yes, I will at the end
Awesome.
because we're kind of in a phase where 0 to 5 is applying for that funding right now, and so I'll go into that at the
Okay.
end of the
Apologies
presentation.
if you already said
No,
that.
you're
I've been
good. You're
in and out
good.
of the meeting here because I'm juggling multiple things like most of us.
Yes, I appreciate that, John, and I definitely will get to it at the end. And if you have to hop off at that point and you still have that question at the end of the webinar, reach out to me. I know you've got my email, and I will let you know. All right, so let's get into the model first. So Circle of Parents, I'm just going to give you a few facts about it, and then we'll go into the nuts and bolts of what this looks like. This picture is of my daughter who's turning 5 next week, and I just had to put it in there because I've been thinking about her a lot lately with her birthday coming up. Circle of Parents is a peer-led group. So it's led by hopefully at least two parents who are in the demographic that that group serves and have experience with what that feels like in real life. And then and they are hopefully supported, and kind of I'll get into this with the funding at the end too, but they are supported by an anchor organization that helps give concrete resources to those parents who lead the group.
Rosa,
And
you have a
typically they're all
question.
trained at the same time. What was that, Carrie?
There's a question in the chat.
Perfect. Can you tell me what that question is?
It says, does the facilitator have special training? I would be concerned about the group devolving into misinformation.
Absolutely. That is a great question. So yes, there is a model training that I have trained all of the parent leaders and facilitators in Montana. And Heather and Barb trained me, and they have trained some other folks. But I think at this point, most of them I have trained now, specifically at this juncture. So I do a model training whenever a new group starts, and also do group facilitation training and give them some introductory skills with motivational interviewing and group facilitation skills. Because, yeah, when you have a peer-led model, that's a great question to ask. That sometimes that means that anything could go and you're not sure what to expect. So there's kind of a vetting process when we select our parent champions, our parent leaders to facilitate these groups. It's a pretty big ask. And typically we try and have two of them so that they can support one another depending on what's going on in their lives. And also just in a group meeting, if things feel a little bit um, if it feels like things are going awry, or maybe things have gone off the rails a bit, that they can support one another in kind of bringing things back in. So that's a great question. Yes, all parent leaders are trained, and all anchor orgs have a facilitator that is also trained to be a support to that group as well. Circle of Parents started in 1999 nationally. It's present in about 20 states at this point. I would say, I don't know how many over 350, but I'm saying over 350 because this is about a year and a half old, this data that I found. But there's about 350 groups nationwide serving over 5,000 caregivers annually. And about 3,000 children are served in the communities that offer these through childcare or a children's program that happens in tandem with the group. So the way that the groups run are that parents are meeting in one area or space to be able to have this support group experience. And at the same time, there's free childcare offered or a children's program offered in some kind of an adjoining space or room at the same time, so that parents feel like they can speak freely to that experience without worrying what their child is overhearing. Also, to give a sense of respite for that parent so that they don't feel like they're constantly taking care of their kiddo's needs, and they can actually have that space to seek support. And in some areas, depending on the time of year and depending on their childcare availability, some of them have met at a park from time to time in a more public space where parents are kind of in charge of their own kiddos. We try not to have that be the typical way that it runs, but just sometimes based on kind of a last minute shift in childcare availability or children's programming availability, that has happened on occasion. But like I said, we try not to make that the norm. So the mission of Circle of Parents is to prevent child abuse and neglect and strengthen families through mutual self-help parent support groups. And the vision is that Circle of Parents Circle of Parents vision is a world where all caregivers have the knowledge, skills, and support to raise strong, resilient, and happy children. That's a big vision, and that's a big mission. But I do feel like the groups that meet those communities and those families are changed for sure. So some of the core tenets, like I said, this is a pretty flexible model. It might look different to go to the group in Butte versus the group in Dillon, here where I live. But we hope that through that training and through the technical support given to those who are trained, that no matter what group you walk into, you would see these core tenets. So you would be able to see that children are valuable. Children have the right to grow up free from abuse and neglect. Children have a right to a safe environment. Children have the right to a nurturing home, family, and community. Parents and families have the right to non-judgmental support. Parents and families have the right to respect. Parents and families have the right to compassion. Strong communities value children and engage families. Communities have the right to parent support groups that are culturally responsive, and communities grow through support from their own members. Kind of back to that Margaret Mead quote earlier, and communities benefit from equal treatment of all members. So hopefully the idea is if you were walk into any Circle of Parents group throughout the nation, you would feel these tenets in that meeting. The model is also developed around 5 protective factors that we also hope, and this is kind of the way that we word it, is that no matter what meeting you would walk into, you would hopefully be able to tick off all of these 5 boxes as something that you would experience in that group when you attended. That you would be able to see some development of parental resilience, that you would be able to see social connections happening. That you would be able to see parents gaining a knowledge of parenting and child development in some way. And this is not necessarily in formal ways. These are happening in pretty informal ways as parents connect and share together. And that they would find some concrete support in times of need. So are there brochures, there are resources there that they can take home to be able to connect to service providers? Are they getting referrals to certain people who could help in a school district? Is there perhaps a guest speaker there who would share something with them? Are they getting some level of concrete support to help that family that when they left, they knew that they had some place to lean into to help their family? And then are there social emotional competence of children? Is that addressed in some way? Are we sharing in some way together how to help parents better understand social and emotional competence? So I have another slide that helps me remember these in really easy ways, and I love it so much. So you just take your hand to remember these 5 protective factors. And these are protective factors specifically against those adverse childhood experiences we hear about so often, ACEs. And these are factors of resilience to help when even if there are adverse childhood experiences happening in the home. There is also an ACEs training as part of the model training when parents are trained to become group leaders. I'm not going to get into that today, but that is a component of the model. So I've got my hand up, so I may as well just finish this, huh? Okay, so your thumb reminds you of social emotional competence of children because a thumbs up is one of the first ways that we learn to communicate our emotions. Even when we're little and someone asks if how we're doing, we can say, I'm okay or I'm not okay. So the thumb will help you remember social emotional competence of children. Your forefinger is a knowledge of parenting and child development. Think of those big foam fingers because you are your child's first teacher and you're also your child's biggest supporter. So you get knowledge of parenting and child development because you're their first #1 teacher. And then social connection is your middle finger. And I'm going to do it like this because we remember that the middle finger should never stand alone. So it talks about social connection that way. And then your ring finger is parental resilience because your first commitment must be to yourself as a parent or caregiver in order to be strong and care for your children and the others that you care for. And then the pinky is concrete support in times of need because your pinky is your smallest finger and reminds us that sometimes we all need help and support. So those are the 5 protective factors that we hope in all Circle of Parents groups you would see as you wander in and participate there. That in some way those things would be captured in any given group. So what does this look like? And that's one of the biggest questions that we have for parents as they come in to get trained as a parent leader is, okay, well, you told me like what's important to know about as a group leader and what kinds of things you would want to see, but things are still pretty vague. What will I see when I go to a group? So in Montana, groups meet monthly typically. And as we get into the funding, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But so typically groups meet about once a month. Usually they pick something like the first Thursday of the month or like the third Friday of the month or whatever, something pretty consistent like that. And a meal is typically provided. Eating together is a very equalizing thing to do, especially as we're hoping to make people feel comfortable enough to share and seek support. If, I mean, we all got to eat. And so if we all sit down together, it's a very equalizing opportunity to be able to engage together, and maybe feel like more of a peer
I do,
situation.
but I mean, I can get back to you today about that.
All right. So then we have also as part of the group is they have free childcare. So all groups are free, just as a model tenant as part of Circle of Parents. No Circle of Parents group throughout the nation is allowed to charge a parent to attend. But the childcare and the meal are also provided at no cost to the participants. So free childcare or a child's programming, depending on where the group is, this might be a little bit more robust. Some of them have like a full-on craft that the kids are doing, or games, or a little bit more involved programming. And in some areas, based on the resources where they're meeting, it might just be like childcare and kind of a play area that they're engaging in. Meetings are co-led by parents who are trained facilitators. And group size varies a bit. Smaller groups have like five-ish people. Some of our more robust groups have up to 20 people. And depending on kind of the seasonality of what's going on, that ebbs and flows. The group in Great Falls, for example, typically has a couple of groups that they really just put a lot into and they try and plan around and make kind of a bigger deal. So around school, the start of school in the fall, they usually have kind of a back to school picnic situation, and they have a lot more attendance at that than maybe they would in the middle of July when people are kind of out of town because they travel and things like that. So, yeah, group sizes vary a bit depending on your location and the time of year. And then participating parents gain a sense of belonging and relief. So sometimes groups are more formal, depending on where you go. The group that has met in Missoula has typically been very structured in the way that they have a guest speaker that comes almost every single time, and that guest speaker shares something about how to help children with special health care needs. They have an occupational therapist come in and share about their services. They have someone from the school district come in and share about IEPs. They have someone who maybe does speech therapy come in and talk about that. So they have a pretty structured set to the way that goes, or they go to a community event and attend together where there is something that would be helpful or meaningful for children with special health care needs. So the group in Missoula is a little bit more formal. The group in Beaverhead County, typically the most formal thing that they do is they have a craft there for the parents. It's a postpartum mental health support group for moms, and usually they have some kind of a hands-on thing that the moms are doing while they're talking and sharing with one another. Some groups have like a jar of questions that they pull out, and some of them just show up with a meal and they just visit. So it depends on what group you're at, and it also depends on kind of what the group's needs are. We collect data and ask that the group facilitators ask often what the group needs or wants, and collect feedback from those groups to be able to help better cater to those needs. But what the actual group meeting looks like could vary. So a little bit more about what these groups look like. Parents become resources for one another inside and outside of the group. These are not like private, we don't talk to each other after the group kinds of groups that you would see maybe in group therapy. As someone who's led a lot of group therapy, HIPAA, we're not encouraging people to exchange phone numbers and things like that. But in a parent support group, we want them to be able to build a village. We want them to be able to lean into one another as a place of support when needed, so that they can have someone that they know that they could trust with a kiddo with special health care needs. If they have like an emergency appointment come up or something happen where they would really need someone to watch their kiddo or help them with something, but you don't necessarily trust everybody with your child in general, especially when they have special healthcare needs. So we want them to be able to connect to each other in and out of group settings. They learn to share coping strategies with each other, really through the sentiment of like, I've been there. I know what this feels like. I've been in those trenches. I get that. And they can share a little bit of their journeys with each other. Typically, when groups are brand new and they're starting out, we encourage parents to start the group in a similar way that I started this meeting, by sharing something about your parenting journey that brought you into that space, or that was maybe the impetus for you wanting to be involved in that group. So when I started the postpartum group that we have here in Beaverhead County, I began that first meeting by sharing my entrance into motherhood, that anxiety that I had postpartum. I didn't sleep for 4 days after I had my oldest. I really felt like I needed to watch him sleep at all times. And newborns sleep like 20 hours a day. So I just felt like I had to watch his chest rise and fall to make sure that he was okay. And my husband is a very chill person who doesn't have that anxiety and didn't have the same hormones going on that I did, and didn't have that same experience of seeing a kiddo who had passed away from SIDS loaded into an ambulance. So when I would tell him, okay, I'm going to try and take a nap, you watch him sleep, he felt like that was ridiculous. And he was like, he's going to sleep and it's okay. I don't need to watch his chest rise and fall. But to me, that was something that was a non-negotiable. I had to watch him at all times. And I finally just collapsed because 4 days without sleep was just too much, especially when you've had an emergency C-section in there and you're learning how to breastfeed. Anyway, I shared a bit of that experience in the first group that we had here in Beaverhead County. And I had another mom there volunteer immediately to be another facilitator in the group because she felt seen. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought that it was just me. I thought that I was crazy. Like I really just thought that I was crazy because I could not sleep and I felt like I had to watch my child at all times." And she was a tremendous support and even became a trainer to help me throughout the state build the program throughout the state of Montana. But that vulnerability invites vulnerability is typically what you will see in the beginning of a group to help kick things off and set the tone for a meeting. And lastly, parents learn to advocate for themselves and other parents as they give and receive help. Just as Carla stood up in that school board meeting, and Heather stepped in and said, "Let's do this together." There's a sense of advocacy and empowerment that you get from being in these groups together. So I'm going to open this up for discussion. So these groups are nationwide. There are a lot of models to choose from to help parents. What might be some of the values of having a mutual self-help group versus something that's more formalized? I've taught Circle of Security Parenting. I've taught Love and Logic. I've taught, a lot of formal parenting classes, and there's certainly value in both. But what could be the specific values, and anyone can come off mute and share here, that we might see from a mutual self-help group like Circle of Parents?
And again, we encourage you, if mute feels a little scary, or if you're having a problem with your mic, chat works too. And I see someone in chat.
Parents become more agents of their own education and development.
Yeah, absolutely. Parents really become, I like the word you used, agent there, right? They feel empowered to act. Yes, absolutely. And what do we have in the chat?
Desiree said community and not feeling alone in your struggles.
Absolutely, yeah. I used to, as a therapist, refer people to self-help groups all the time, particularly postpartum groups. And I remember parents saying things like, "Well, I don't want people to judge me. I don't want people to know my stuff. Private therapy feels safer because people won't know my stuff." But the value of a group setting is that everyone who is there for similar reasons that you are. Everyone there is a part of your community, and there's a sense of safety in that. Yeah, absolutely.
They're
Um,
also, I'm thinking of our postpartum support group that we do monthly, which is led and facilitated by staff person here. But,
Yeah.
you know, parents also feel empowered. It's so cool to see parents walking out of the room saying, "Hey, do you want to grab a coffee now with me?" And, building their own network.
Yeah, building their own network. Yeah, absolutely. And that network becomes a safety net for them. Yeah, beautiful.
in the chat, Gray says families might feel less stigma in attending. And then Megan said giving parents the opportunity to create community that can exist outside of those groups will be more impactful long term. They may not always be able to attend those groups, but they may be able to maintain those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I see that a lot in Beaverhead County too. Not every person hits every group every month, but they definitely become that network of support. And remind me what Gray said again. I'm trying to go back to
Um,
that.
families might feel less stigma in attending.
Oh, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Families might feel less stigma in attending if it's led by someone who's like them. If it's not like this formalized, there's this expert telling me what to do kind of a situation, especially in Montana. Like, Montanans don't love people to tell them what they need to change. Like, we're independent, strong folks, right? And and we also don't like it when people tell us what our like perceived needs are. Um, we tend to respond as Montanans a little bit better when we feel like we're on the same playing field as somebody else, when we're on the same level, which is another reason for that meal as an equalizer too. That there's this double layer of we're like each other. We're in the same boat together. Yeah, thank you, Gray. Any other thoughts about that? All right, I have another slide here that talks a little bit about from a research perspective, because there's a lot of data collected by the Circle of Parents National Group. And some of the data that they have, just in comparing it to a more formalized parenting situation, is that there tends to be a set curriculum. So, as someone who has taught Circle of Parents for several years, I mean, Circle of Security, I always get those, it's too close. As someone who has taught Circle of Security, which is an evidence-based program, it's almost like a dosage, right? So you have groups for a specific amount of time. So often there needs to be so many of them, and you need to do specific things to fit that model so that parents who are attending get the evidence base supports and benefits of attending that specific class. Whereas if you compare that to a peer support model, we have the discussion topics are determined by the people who are there in real time. So there are people who are coming into the room feeling so overwhelmed by maybe a day that they had, and that needs to be the place where they can safely share about that and process that and get tools and support. So that's one of the benefits.
We have a couple comments in the
Thank
chat.
you, Carrie.
Yeah, Minetta, sorry if I'm not saying that right. Is there any Indian programs that has Circle of Parents and are they successful?
So we do have one on tribal lands right now, and that is on the Crow Reservation. And that group has been long-standing. I think that they were trained around the same time that I was. So probably 5 years ago. It's been established for about 5 years. The group there is actually a virtual group, and they have a Facebook page as kind of their main platform to be able to connect to one another. And they have kind of the model that parents have the permission whenever they are feeling overwhelmed. It's specific to children. I want to say either children on the autistic spectrum. Actually, I think that is. I think it's specific to kiddos on the autistic spectrum. And they have kind of an overall group norm that as parents are feeling overwhelmed, they can write an SOS basically to say, I need help stat. And someone who is within that group calls them right away and tries to help, or as soon as they can after they see something like that, to try and help them in real time. It's a really neat and unique model, but they have met virtually since COVID because there was a lot of trauma to that area at that time for those families, and in-person meetings weren't necessarily really happening anywhere in the nation during COVID in 2020. So yeah, we do have one on specific to tribal lands. But as we get into the funding kind of at the end of this presentation, our goal as we're applying 0 to 5 right now is applying for funding and expansion of this program. We are specifically leaning into tribal lands as places to expand Circle of Parents services. I'm working in partnership with Callie Parr here at 0 to 5, who is our early childhood tribal coordinator, to be able to lean into partnerships in those areas and develop those groups and those areas for the value of that peer support ad. Again, hoping to avoid the sentiment that I know what you need and let me tell you what you need, and really letting people in those communities drive what those groups look like. So that's a great question. Was there another question
Yeah,
in the
Desiree,
chat?
and not really a question. Desiree just made a comment. I'm the parent of a child with type 1 diabetes, and when I tried to find local groups for it online, I was sent a few messages that people don't talk about this stuff publicly. This has
Hmm.
changed a lot in the last 6.5 years, but those messages made me cry because I wanted a community to connect with about this.
Yeah, absolutely. How wonderful would it be to be able to enter a room knowing you have permission to go there, right? Having been told that you don't have permission to go there. This isn't a thing we talk about. How horrible is that? This is a life-changing thing for your family, not just your child and not just for you. And to not be able to have a place to understand what life looks like now. How do we plan meals as a family? How do we plan trips as a family? How do we navigate school as a family? There are so many pieces of that you need to be able to lean into for support. And that's a great thing I don't have on this slide, is that sometimes you don't have permission to go to those places in formalized parenting groups because maybe that's not what the group is about. And if it is, then maybe they have a set thing that they're supposed to hit to talk about it. Yeah, great point there. Um, and that's kind of this third bullet point down, is that instructors determine the content when you have a formalized parenting program. Whereas in a peer-led group, the people in that group who become supports for one another, who are the experts for one another, they drive the content of those meetings. Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a sense of like a power shift, a power dynamic where parents expect answers from the instructor in a formalized setting, whereas when you're in a peer-led mutual self-help arena, there's a sense where parents look to each other as the experts. They empower each other and they can be supports to each other and also get support depending on what life looks like for them. There will be times when parents go into that group and they can feel so helpful and empowered by sharing a resource of their journey with another parent who might be in a different spot than them. And there will be other times where they enter that space with questions on their mind and seeking support, seeking validation, so that power dynamic really isn't there. It's a very equalized experience. And also there's a sense of shared demographic where you're not looking to go through all of the parenting topics. You're really just there to focus on a sense of support. That is the purpose of the group, is to get support and to give support. So just some of the research indicators that they found through researching this model. So how does this fit with family engagement? Because you're here for a family engagement training, right? So some of the things that work really well for family engagement within the Circle of Parents model are that the barriers for attendance are mitigated. So when we offer free childcare or a children's programming in a safe, equitable environment by people who are trained to be there and help your kiddos, and we offer you a nutritious meal, that breaks down some of the barriers for not going to something like this. So that helps with family engagement. And I would say, as someone who formerly led parenting classes in Beaverhead County here, some of those even more structured classes, I just made that a blanket thing of how I operated. I just said, if I'm going to be teaching a parenting class, we're going to offer free childcare and we're going to offer a free meal. And that's just the way that it works, because parents need those barriers broken down to be able to engage. Groups are are built with a sense of security and community. If I walk into a room, kind of like we had just discussed before, knowing that everyone else in that room is seeking support like I am and understands at least a little bit the experience that I'm dealing with because of the demographics of the group, then there's a sense of security and safety in being there and a sense of community building, which is something that we've had some other comments about on this webinar. And then groups groups are targeted to specific demographics based on the needs in their areas. So in some areas, they have different needs than others. And based on the needs in those areas and based on the parent champions, the group is going to look a little bit different. The group in Great Falls on purpose looks very different than the group in Superior. And so the groups get to drive those demographic factors of what that support looks like based on the needs of that community. So it's really catered. And then groups are led by parent champions. Family engagement is something that's a little bit easier to do when you've got that in person to person connection of I've been there. I know what this feels like. I'm a parent just like you. You should come and support me, and I'll support you. I have tried to start Circle of Parents groups, not being a part of that demographic, and it did not work. It fell flat because I was not a peer to them. And I had parent champions that I had, that we had agreed to train as parent leaders, but me starting up the group and kicking it off wasn't the appropriate thing to do because I wasn't a parent champion in their demographic. I wasn't like them, so to speak, to be able to invite them in a more community-based, equalizing experience. It just didn't feel as appropriate. However, subsequently, when someone else took the reins who was in that role and really understood that experience, things took off in a much better way. And then parents are assigned different roles. So, Circle of Parents, as you walk into a group, we hope that the group leaders will give out roles in the same way that I did at the beginning of this session. So, those of you who have been given roles, I invite you to just go off of mute for a second and share how you're feeling being in this particular meeting, knowing that you've got a job to do. What does that feel like? How does that change your participation? So I'm looking at you, Gray and Carrie and Betty, right? If you could just share for a second.
I'm happy to go ahead.
Thank you, Gray.
Yeah, I'm like anticipating when my job is gonna be and feel like,
Yes.
right, of course I'm listening all the time, but I'm like, yeah, looking forward to that and feel a little, yeah, feel a little more important that it matters that I'm here. So,
Oh, it matters that I'm here. I love that you said that. Beautiful. Any other thoughts, Carrie or Betty, right?
My thoughts are just literally like I'm checking the phone to make sure time wise that it's not, we're not telling you too early or telling you too late, but still collecting everything that I want to try to get out of the training, but still uphold my job to make sure I'm not going to set the meeting sideways.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment. Sometimes there's a level of pressure, and I think Gray mentioned that a little bit too. There's a sense of like, oh, I've got this thing, I've got to pay attention to this thing, and maybe I don't feel like I can do the full participation of all of the just sit and listen. But there's a sense of like, oh, I have a responsibility. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, Carrie, before we move on from this part and kind of finish out the role discussion? So as we invite parents to engage in roles, what the hope is that we build a culture of doers, of helpers, of parent leaders within the framework of the group, that it's a sense of community, that when I walk in and I see that someone is putting out the meal and I am asked to help set up the meal sometimes. When I walk in, whether or not I was asked to, I feel a sense of ownership for that, and I'm going to try and help with that. Or if I'm asked to be the timekeeper, I feel like I have a valuable piece of what's going on. And Betty, I'm telling you, I'm a talker, so I need somebody to tell me when I have 5 minutes left because I might just keep going. Uh, so it's really helpful for me as the person who's leading the group because these are parent leaders, right? These aren't people who are like trained and formally in a role of like community development or working for a community org. These are parents who really just get that experience. So it's helpful for them to have the doers, but it's also helpful for the family engagement that if I show up and I know that I'm typically the person who takes photos, or I'm typically the person who helps clean up, or I'm typically the person who helps with data collection, and I do those things often enough, I feel a sense of responsibility to keep coming back. I feel valuable. And as Gray said, I feel a little bit important when I do things like that. I feel like I'm needed. The goal is by giving parents who are attending, not just the parent leaders, but giving parents who are attending a role as they walk in the door, they feel a sense of ownership for what's going on. And that helps with the family engagement piece of this, that they feel a sense that if I didn't show up, maybe the group wouldn't be set up as well. Or maybe if I didn't show up, it wouldn't be as good of an experience for other people. Not in a way that makes you feel guilty, but in a way of like, I help co-create this, and this is something that I'm valuable. This is a space that I'm valuable in.
Hey, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I was trying to talk and I thought it was unmuted and it wasn't
Oh,
earlier.
been there.
It says
Been
I can
there.
push the space bar and unmute and it didn't
Yeah.
do it. So I just wanted to say when it came to the, the responsibility of having a role, it can be really easy in these Zoom meetings to also multitask and do other things. And it just kind of helps keep you more engaged, I think, with the training or with the presentation. And mine
Yeah.
specifically, like I want to make sure that people in the chat aren't getting, missed over or anything. So it's kind of helped me stay a little more engaged with things as well.
Yeah, I like that word engage because even in a like on Zoom especially, like how many of us have turned off that camera and we're not necessarily there. I mean, I think we've all had that experience where we've just got a lot going on, we're in and out, and maybe we're not super present. But when we're asked to do something like moderate the chat, my goodness, you really feel like you've got to be there, right? And there are virtual groups that meet. We have a virtual group that meets throughout the state. That the parent is based in Billings, but has lived in other parts of the state and felt that it was very important to offer a group that no matter what was going on with your children that night, like you could hopefully be able to hop on. And so we do have a virtual group that meets, and she's running it alone right now. So she doesn't have somebody to help moderate the chat. And that would be hard as someone who's like trying to facilitate, to not have someone who's paying attention to something that you can't necessarily see the whole time. So Carrie, and Betty and Gray, I just want to say thank you because as someone who's leading it, it is so helpful. But you're right, Carrie, on the other side, it keeps us engaged. It keeps us like in it. We're looking for it. And I think the others have mentioned that too. So even at in-person meetings too, that happens. There are times where we just kind of zone out or we disengage. But if we feel like we have something that makes us valuable to the running of things, then we feel a little bit more engaged. So where are circle groups? Currently, ooh, that didn't blow up well. It's kind of grainy, but currently this is where the circle groups are. We are establishing a group in Kalispell. So if you're in the Kalispell area and you're like, I have heard nothing about this one, I was a bit premature to put this here. It is in development. We have a group in Superior, and the group in Superior is a postpartum mental health group. The group in Missoula is a group for parents with special health care needs. The group in Butte is also for parents with special health care needs. The group in Sheridan is for parents Oh, the Circle website, John, I just saw that. That is dated. I have asked them to update it, and I've actually given them my graphics here. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it is something that we're working on with the National Circle of Parents folks. The group in Sheridan is a postpartum group, not just for moms though, but for fathers and other caregivers as well, because sometimes you adopt a kiddo. So it's like a postpartum through toddler years support group in Sheridan. I think they call it like Sheridan Families Connect. And then in Dillon, we have a postpartum moms group, postpartum mental health. There is a virtual group that anyone is able to attend. I'm happy to send those links out to Karen so that she can share that with all of you. And then there are two groups in Great Falls, one of them serving parents in recovery, and then one of them serving children with families with special health care needs. And we have two groups in Billings, one of them serving parents who've experienced trauma, and another for families with special health care needs. And then in Bighorn County, we have that virtual group for tribal families to be able to connect. And this one is specifically for families who have kiddos on the autistic spectrum. As we are developing the next steps for the Circle of Parents group. 0 to 5 is currently the state affiliate to kind of house the Circle of Parents membership as part of the national group. But we are not yet funded to be able to do this. We've given out mini grants at this point to be able to help keep things going, but there's kind of a lapse in the state contract. There was some changes from the organization that used to run it. They were not able to fulfill the contract after being awarded the contract. So 0 to 5 Montana has committed to finding funding and supporting these groups long term. We have a very promising application we are turning into the state this week. Like I said, very, very promising. I think the words that they used were, "We will move heaven and earth to try and make this happen." So pretty promising. So we're finishing up that application and submitting it this week. We should know by the end of October. If you are interested in starting a group in your area, please reach out. As we have applied for this funding, we have applied for some level of expansion. We might not be able to expand into every area in Montana, but we do have expansion available for about 6 groups, 6 more groups to the ones that are here. And we have the goal of specifically starting to prioritize leaning into tribal areas. So even more specifically, if you're in a tribal area and you, based on the funding that we're applying for, and you would like to be able to start a group there, or you have a connection to a parent champion or someone that you feel would be a good contact for us, please reach out. But we do have, in this funding that we're applying for right now, some flexibility to be able to look at where these groups might be and try and lean into expand these services throughout the state. So if you do not see a little locator there for the area that you're living in, please reach out because we would like to be able to support groups in more places in Montana. And like I said, this funding is quite promising as we're applying, so we do feel confident that this is something that we can expand and continue offering. So John asked about what the funding looks like. So typically the funding for these groups looks like the following. Parents who are leaders get a stipend or a parent leader award to be able to provide those services each month. Their time is valuable. They're putting in a lot of effort. So they get a $30 stipend historically. I think we've increased that to $40 per month. And each time they come and do a group, their anchor org would award them with that. In the past, anchor orgs have just purchased like Amazon gift cards or things like that. So they have given parent awards in that manner. It also pays for childcare for I believe it's $20 an hour for 2 hours still $40 for for 2 childcare providers in those spaces. So if the funding that we're awarded fits with what we've applied for there, that would be also included. So parent leader awards, childcare, and a stipend for meals that would be provided at those groups. So there would be a set amount of funding that would be offered for the meal and the supplies that you would like paper goods or if you print flyers or things like that. So each group would get a monthly allotment or budget that they get to kind of freely be able to decide how much of it goes towards the meal, how much of it goes towards marketing, how much of it goes towards paper goods and craft supplies or things like that. And that would all be a part of that award. If you are a subcontractor, a sub awardee from the funding that we're like I said, we would know by the end of this month. Then we would award these funds on a quarterly basis. And then as we receive data back from the participation, the demographics of that group, we would send the next quarter of funding. So really what it would pay for is the general operating of each group through the meal, the childcare, and parent awards. And also we would provide funding for the training of the people who are coming to be trained in the model. So it would pay for their travel and their meals and their hotel room to travel to that in-person training, which is also paired with an annual convening of all of the parent leaders of established groups and new groups coming together to be able to have a sense of support and networking for the people who support people, if that makes sense. A sense of general help and networking for those parent leaders that they could feel free to reach out to a group leader in another area and be familiar with them through that annual convening experience to be able to continue offering the services that they provide in their community. So it translates into throughout the course of a year about a little over $3,000 a year to be able to just run this group. But then additional funds for travel and hotel and things like that to be able to come to a training and an annual convening throughout the state. So as I end here, are there any questions that you have? I'd really like to be able to dive into that if you have any.
Aaron and I in the chat mentioned a little bit about Roots Family Collaborative and their
Oh.
Blossom model, which is pretty similar. I'm curious
Oh,
if
really?
you have experienced it and could make any comparisons.
Yeah, I'm actually not familiar with that, but I am happy to look into it and send you a follow-up email where I give you my thoughts on that. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that. I do know that because this is quite a flexible model, that there are a lot of things probably happening in many areas that look quite similar.
I would just imagine they have, because Roots Family Collaborative started because there was a lack of services and the like founders experienced a lot of hardships, and so they started it so there was no gaps.
Yeah.
And so I just think it would be an awesome pairing for that, and then you'd have additional support, mental health support for everybody else as well too.
Yeah, I agree. That does sound very similar to why I started the group in Beaver County.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. That sounds very familiar. Yeah.
And I
Any
know
other
that
questions?
Roots uses the group peer support. That sounds very generic, but that's the name of an organization, grouppeersupport.org model to
Okay.
train their facilitators.
Oh yeah, I'll have to look into that to kind of compare and I'll give you my notes. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of very similar things happening and established because the model is well supported in research. Peer support builds engagement. People just feel a little bit more comfortable and secure coming to a situation that they feel is equalizing.
Well, thank you so much. our time is coming to an end. So I want to give Melissa last words, but I just want to mention to everyone, I am sending a follow-up email that will include Melissa's email because I saw several of you are interested in learning more, and we'll have a brief survey and I'll tell you about our next one. So thank you, Melissa. I'm going to turn it over to you for last words.
I just want to thank first and foremost the folks who took on a role to help me. I really appreciate that support and that help as I facilitated today, and hopefully you got a little bit of a flavor of what it feels like to be in that peer learning model. And I just want to thank you all for coming and participating. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and is a beautiful way to engage families. And I invite you to reach out to me if you're interested.
Great. Thank you all. Appreciate your time and your efforts.